Okay, everybody, welcome to CNT's 120's Chapter 6 Wireless Networking Chapter. As always, after we're completing this lesson, I would hope that we were all able to identify and describe the various types of networking characteristics, wireless networking characteristics, explain the various wireless standards that support the IoT or Internet of Things, explain 802.11 standards and innovations, implement a Wi-Fi network, secure a Wi-Fi network, the implementing and securing the Wi-Fi network we'll talk about, and then you'll reinforce those in your lab. And we'll go over some troubleshooting tips for wireless networks as well. So before further ado, let's go ahead and begin. For decades, radio and TV have transmitted analog signals through the air. The air provides an intangible means of transporting data over networks, and it's often used in conjunction with our wired technologies. Now, this lesson, we're going to look at how wireless transmissions work, regardless of the type of wireless technology used. These wireless characteristics will apply to satellite, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, cellular, even infrared. Some of these signals, such as satellite and cellular, have the ability to travel long distances, and we'll discuss those later on in further detail. And for those of you who decide to move into the Wireless 260 class, we'll hit them pretty hard. This lesson, we're going to explore how to set up, manage, and secure, troubleshoot local wireless networks that you might find, say, in an enterprise setting, or that you might find in your own home. In previous chapters, we talked about signals that travel over the physical medium, like the copper wire, the fiber optic. LANs that transmit signals through the air via RF or radio frequency waves are known as wireless local area networks, or what we call a wireless LAN or WLAN. Now, the wireless transmission media is now common in business and in home networks, and necessary in some specialized networking environments. Now, wired and wireless signals share many similarities, including use of the same layer 3 and higher protocols. So, for example, however, the nature of atmosphere makes wireless transmission vastly different from wired at the lower OSI layers, let's take a look at wireless signals, and then we'll see how they're transmitted. It all comes down to what we call the wireless spectrum. Now, all wireless signals are carried through the air by electromagnetic waves. The wireless spectrum, commonly called the airwaves, is the frequency range of electromagnetic waves used for data and voice communication, as they're defined by the FCC. Now, the FCC controls the use of these different wireless frequencies. The wireless spectrum spans frequency ranges or bands between anywhere between the 9 kilohertz range all the way to 300 gigahertz. Please understand that a hertz, or an HC, means 1 cycle per second. So if you're looking at that graphic there, it shows you the frequency ranges from low to high used by wireless technologies. Now notice in the table that several of the bands cover a frequency range that is further subdivided into channels. Now some bands have only a single frequency, which is called a fixed frequency for the band. Now, we also notice that Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, Zigbee, and the ANT Plus are, as well as some satellite signals, share frequencies that are all residing in that 2.4 gigahertz range. Now, these technologies share these airwaves without one signal interfering with the other. So how does that happen? Well, we'll talk about that. So let's look how the channels are managed, and that's really how we keep all these different frequencies from stepping on each other's toes. So a band used by a wireless device is defined by its overall frequency range. So to allow multiple devices to share the same band, the band would then be divided into channels. And channels are further subdivided into what we call narrow band channels. So most wireless devices implement one of two technologies to take advantage of the frequencies within its band so that it can avoid interference. Now, one of those is FHSS. Now that is frequency hopping spread spectrum. So what we have are short bursts of data transmitted on a particular frequency within the band. And then the next burst goes to the next frequency in the sequence. So this frequency hopping can happen hundreds of times in a second. So the frequency hopping spread spectrum is cheaper to implement than direct sequence spread spectrum, which we'll talk about next. And it performs better than DSSS in, say, like a crowded indoor environment. Now, direct sequence spread spectrum, or now we're just going to call it DSSS because it's just easier to say. Okay. The data streams are divided and encoded into small chunks. Now we call these small chunks chips. We call them that because there are zeros and ones, and we don't want those to get confused with bits. So when we spread the data stream into encoded chunks, we call those chunks chips. We spread them over variable frequencies within one of three wide channels all at the same time. And the process of dividing and encoding the data is called chipping, and the spreading ratio used to transform the data is called the chip encode, which is unique to each device. The DSSS uses the available bandwidth more efficiently than the frequency hopping spread spectrum, and then tends to have, therefore, a higher throughput. So here's a breakdown of what we're talking about. Okay, with the wireless standards in the 2.4 gigahertz range, it uses its allotted band for use of its allotted band. Okay, Wi-Fi commonly used, okay, for wireless internet access uses DSSS in the United States. The FCC has defined 11 channels within the 2.4 gigahertz band for Wi-Fi and 24 bands for 5 gigahertz. Other countries might have 14 Wi-Fi for 2.4, but it doesn't matter. In the United States, each channel is 20 megahertz wide. So a Wi-Fi access point, which is the central connectivity device for Wi-Fi clients on a network, is manually configured to use a selected group of channels. Wi-Fi client devices scan the entire band for active channels. Bluetooth, also on the 2.4 gigahertz range. Okay, Bluetooth is commonly used to connect wireless personal devices. It uses FHSS to take advantage of the 79 channels allocated strictly to Bluetooth. So in a network of Bluetooth devices, which is called a piconet, one device is designated the master and provides a clock that the other devices use to coordinate their channel hopping. Because Bluetooth transmissions are constantly hopping channels, interference and collisions are then unlikely to cause a significant problem because those channels are always hopping. So if your Wi-Fi is using DSSS and your Bluetooth is using FHSS, then the chances of you being on the same channel at the same time are rare. Now, there's another thing out there called Zigbee. Now, Zigbee is commonly used in industrial, scientific, and medical devices, and it uses DSSS, and it uses 16 channels. And then there's this thing called ANT+, which commonly used in activity monitoring devices, uses the frequency uses a fixed frequency, and therefore it doesn't use DHSS and it doesn't use FHSS. Now, even with the frequency spread of FHSS or DSS to avoid interference, collisions can still happen. It's rare, but it can happen. Each technology has a procedure to follow when it senses a collision. So, for example, when a Bluetooth device senses a collision with a Wi-Fi channel, it backs off, uses the frequencies in the Wi-Fi channel for a short time, giving Wi-Fi the opportunity to finish its transmission. So, once again, Bluetooth, when senses that it stepped on the toes of a Wi-Fi signal, will back off using that Wi-Fi frequency, and then allow the Wi-Fi to catch back up before it resumes its communication. Wi-Fi devices use a listen before transmit strategy to find a silent channel. So more details, we'll talk about that, will come up later on. All of these devices, you have to use an antenna. And the antennas, the air provides like no fixed path for signals to follow. So signals travel without any guidance, contrast to, say, a wired media where it's just going to follow that copper line down or that fiber optic line down from point A to point B. The lack of fixed path requires wireless signals to be transmitted, received, controlled, and then corrected differently than if it were going to be a wire. So part of the work is then done at the hardware level. Just as with wired signals, wireless signals originate from electrical current traveling along a conductor. The electrical signal travels from the transmitter to an antenna, which then emits the signal as a series of electromagnetic waves in the atmosphere. The signal then moves through the air until it reaches its destination. And that destination, another antenna, will then accept that signal, and the receiver will convert it back to current. Now, each type of wireless service requires an antenna specifically designed for the service. So the service's specifications determine the antenna's power output, frequency, and the radiation pattern. An antenna's radiation pattern describes the relative strength over a three-dimensional area of the electromagnetic energy the antenna sends or receives. Radiation patterns can be used to classify antennas into two basic categories. We're going to have a unidirectional, where we issue wireless signals along a signal direction. This type is used when the source needs to communicate with one destination as its point-to-point link or in a specific area. Omnidirectional issues and receives wireless signals with equal strength and clarity in all directions. This type is used when many different receivers must be able to pick up the signal in many different directions. Now, the geographical area that an antenna or wireless system can reach is known as its range. Receivers must be within the range to receive accurate signals consistently. Even with an antenna's range, however, signals may be hampered by obstacles and then rendered unintelligible. Propagation refers to the way in which a wave travels from one point to another. So ideally, a wireless signal would travel directly in a straight line from its transmitter to the intended receiver. That's just not always going to be the case. So this type of propagation, going from point A to point B without anything in the way, will be a line of sight. Maximizes distances for the amount of energy used and results in reception to the clearest possible signal. However, because the atmosphere is an unguided medium and the passage between point A and point B is not always clear, wireless signals do not always follow a straight line. And in reality, it actually turns out to be like like a giant oval going out to where we're, or an ellipse trying to get out to where we're going. And we actually have to have 60% of our signal getting from point A to point B. If we lose 40% of it, our signal might become unintelligible at that point. There's another term we need to learn, and that is attenuation. Now, attenuation, as I've been talking about before, is the weakening of a signal over time and distance. So, as with wired signals, signals also experience attenuation. After a signal is transmitted, the further it moves away from the transmission source, the more it weakens. It also widens. It's no longer going to be that super straight line. In many cases, if our signal becomes too weak between point A and point B, we would have to add what is called a wireless range extender, which will allow us to take the signal in and then correct it and then boost the signal to send it along its way. Interference, on the other hand, we have electromagnetic waves in the atmosphere that actually interfere with our wireless communication. These are called electromagnetic interference. It affects wired transmissions as well. Now, because wireless signals cannot depend on a conduit or shielding to protect them from the extraneous electromagnetic interference, or EMI, they're more vulnerable to noise than wired transmissions are. And the proportion of noise to the strength of the signal is something called SNR, or a signal to noise ratio. Now, signals traveling through areas in which many wireless communication systems are in use, for example, like the center of a metropolitan area, are the most apt to suffer from actual interference. Now, there are times when our signal will bounce off a window, bounce off a plant, bounce off a car, bounce off a mirror, bounce off glass, bounce off of anything. And so it bounces. And as a wave travels into and through a different transmission medium, such as when traveling through glass or other solid objects, the wave's direction, speed, and wavelength might be altered or refracted. So imagine like the light waves that are altered when you're entering the pool or the water. Okay, if you're underwater looking back at the surface, the image might be distorted. Think about when you were in grade school and you did a science experiment. You took a pencil and you placed it into a cup of water, and when you're looking at the line of the pencil, it no longer went straight; it refracted off to the side. That's what we're talking about here, and that's what happens to our wireless signals as well. Reflection, when the wave encounters an obstacle and reflects and bounces back, okay, which causes our signal to not get to its destination at the same time. When a wireless signal encounters an object that has small dimensions compared with the signal's wavelength, and it's diffused or scattered in multiple directions, that scattering is also related to the roughness of the surface of a wireless signal that the wireless signal encounters. The rougher the surface, the more likely a signal is to scatter when it hits the surface. All this causes data to end up at its destination, sometimes out of order. Okay. Diffraction, if a wireless signal is diffracted or split into secondary waves when it encounters an obstruction, the secondary waves continue to propagate in the direction in which they were split. So if you could see wireless signals being diffracted, they would appear to be bending around an obstacle. Objects with sharp edges, including the corners or walls and desks, cause diffraction. Wireless signals follow a number of different paths to their destination. Such signals are known as multi-path signals, and as you can see here, multi-path signals can be caused by reflection, scattering, refraction. Okay, the multi-path nature of wireless signals is sometimes a blessing, but it can also be a curse. On one hand, because signals bounce off obstacles, they got a better chance of getting to their destination. On the other hand, the signal could bounce off so much that it could result in data errors because data is getting in there out of order. Now, we've got this crazy thing out there we've been talking about. It's called the IoT, or the Internet of Things. Everything today is on the internet. Your car is on the internet. Your refrigerator is on the internet. Your bed if you have a new bed, might be on the internet. This is called the Internet of Things. Your thermostats, all these items are on the internet, and most of them are wireless devices. It is said this year, it is believed that this year, we have over 50 billion devices on the internet today. 50 billion. It is said that we have 7.5 or 7.6 billion people on the planet, and if each person's got 7 devices, we're looking at 50 billion devices on the network today. That's a lot that our internet has to be able to handle. And this is what we call the Internet of Things. Now, one of the fastest growing areas of the IoT is the personal monitoring devices, your health monitors, exercise equipment, GPS locators, your smartwatches. Another exploding IoT market interconnects smart home devices. You might already be familiar with your Amazon Echo, your Apple HomePod, your Google devices. These devices, these personal assistants, are part of the IoT. Okay? They're part of our home area networks. Similarly, in a mini version of a LAN or a PAN, personal area network, in a purely wireless version or a WPAN, as defined by the 802.15 specification, these standards include short-range wireless communications or wireless technologies such as Bluetooth and Zigbee. PANs are rarely exceed 10 meters in any direction, and they usually only contain a few personal devices such as a PC, a smartphone, or maybe a printer, or a Bluetooth headset, or an infrared wireless mouse, something like that. But those are typically what makes up our home area networks, our wireless PAN network. Zigbee, which is based on the 802.15.4 standard, it's low-powered, battery-conserving wireless technology. It's designed to handle small amounts of data, and it's therefore ideal for ISM, which is our industrial, scientific, and medical sensors. You see a lot of this in your factories for controlling assembly lines, even in your medical centers for your pacemaker, your heart monitors. Zigbee is also used in IoT devices such as like building automation, your HVAC control system, stuff like that. There's another one out there called Z-Wave, Smart Home Protocol, that provides 2 basic types of functions: signaling to maintain or manage a wireless connections and control, and to transmit data and commands between devices. A Z-Wave network controller called a hub receives commands from a smartphone or a computer and then relays those commands to various smart devices on its network. For example, if any of you have, say, like a wireless hub to handle your light bulbs in your house, those would be off of a Z-Wave. Bluetooth, which is the 802.15.1 specification, is named after a medieval king of Denmark named Harald Bluetooth, who fought to merge several Danish tribes into a single government. Like its namesake, Bluetooth technology unites separate entities. So to be precise, it unites mobile devices, PCs, and accessories under a single communication standard. It operates in the radio band of 2.4 all the way to 2.4835 gigahertz, and as we talked about earlier, hops between frequencies within the band, and it does up to 1,600 hops a second to help reduce the interference. Most Bluetooth devices require close proximity to form a connection. So with the exact distance requirements depending on the class of Bluetooth that you've got. Class 1 devices provide the greatest flexibility with their ability to maintain a reliable connection all the way up to 100 meters apart. Here you can see there's three classes, and you can also see their power outputs as well. Bluetooth power output is measured in what we call milliwatts, which is 1/1000th of a watt. So if you compare that with a 60-watt light bulb, you'll get an idea of how tiny the amount of power actually is. Now these days, most new computers come with an integrated Bluetooth adapter. There's a plethora of Bluetooth electronic accessories that are available, from everything from wearing technology like headsets and watches to gaming equipment or high throughput media players. Manufacturers of Bluetooth devices must obtain approval from the Bluetooth SIG or Special Interest Group before selling a new Bluetooth device, which has to meet high standards defined by the Special Interest Group. Now, the various protocols integrated into Bluetooth span all layers of the OSI reference model, from the physical layer all the way to the application layer. And before you can connect two Bluetooth devices, first thing you got to do is you have to pair them. Okay, and so that would be as simple as turn on a device. So Bluetooth, turn on the Bluetooth antenna for each device. Make at least one of the devices discoverable. And then on the other device, you would just choose which device you want to connect to. And in many cases, you would have to then enter a PIN. Sometimes it's up there by default. The next thing we want to talk about today would be ANT+. This technology is based on the ANT protocol, which is an ad hoc wireless protocol. It's in the 2.4 gigahertz range. This is one less acronym to learn, as the term ant simply refers to the insect, which is a small in size and a very tenacious worker. The ANT protocol was originally developed in 2004 by the ANT Wireless division of Dynastream Innovations. There's a company owned by Garmin. People do the satellites, GPS. While ANT Plus is a proprietary protocol, it's also an open source. Therefore, many manufacturers are using it in addition to Garmin. The ANT Plus gathers and tracks information from sensors that are typically embedded in heart rate monitors, GPS devices, and other activity monitoring devices. Garmin smartwatches, for example, track an athlete's activity levels in geographic movement, and then will sync this data to a person's smartphone, computer, or web-based accounts such as Strava. RFID uses, or radio frequency identification, uses electromagnetic fields to store data on a small chip in an RFID tag, which includes an antenna that can transmit and receive, and possibly a battery. The tag holds anywhere from 1 to 8K of data, such as a serial number, credit card information, or medical data. It can transmit to a nearby reader. Tag and reader combinations come in three types. We have an ARPT, which is an active reader passive tag. This, when prompted by an active reader, a passive tag pulls power from the reader's radio waves to power its transmission. These tags only work within a few centimeters of each other. A passive reader active tag. Here, a battery-powered tag actively transmits its credentials at regular time intervals. Battery-powered tags don't require such close proximity to function. Most sophisticated devices will work up to 200 meters away. The active reader tag, or active reader active tag, interacts with a battery-powered tag in itself. Now, RFID is commonly used for inventory management. Because the tag does not need to be precisely positioned close to the reader, the employee can quickly scan the shelf of several items to determine what's in stock and what needs to be reordered. Similarly, it's just like RFID tags are used for, say, your being able to use Android Pay and Google Pay as well. type of device. NFC, so if you ever shared your virtual business card or a photo with a friend by tapping your smartphones together, then you've used NFC, or near field communication. It's a form of RFID, transfers data wirelessly over very short distances, usually 10 centimeters or less. A tiny antenna embedded in the device sends its radio signal at a frequency of about 13.56 megahertz. The signal can also be transmitted one way by an NFC tag or a smart tag, such as when employees need to access a secure area of a building. Other uses of NFC tags include, say, ticketing, cashless payments like you do at the store, shopping, loyalty or membership programs, stuff like that. You can see, as like we have shown here in the graphic, they require no power source other than the receiving device's power field. The NFC tag collects power from the smartphone or other device by magnetic induction, which is a form of wireless power transmission. Now, once power is introduced to the NFC tag by the receiving device proximity, the tag will transmit its data. It can be up to 32K, depending on the tag's type. The four tag type styles. The four tag type styles are type 1, which would be 96 to 2K in size. User configured for read-write purposes only. Type 2, same, but the size is about half, 48K to 2K, 48 bytes to 2K. Type 3 can go up to a meg, and Type 4 up to 32K. And those last two are manufacturer configured for read, write, or read-only purposes. NFC tags are cheap. They can be purchased blank. It can be so that you can create what you need for them. They can be programmed to transmit stored data, launch apps directly to a web browser, to a web page. Okay, a lot of people will do that for their business cards. So when you use NFC and you tap them with a business card, a link will come up and send you to their website, very similar to the way a QR code would work. If you scan someone's QR code, it takes you to a website. Wireless USB, based on the UWB ultra wideband radio platform. Certified WUSB products mimic wired USB connections with similar speeds, similar security, ease of use, compatibility. They transmit in the range of 3.1 to 10.6 gigahertz. A relatively uncrowded band that's also commonly used for wireless media streaming. More recently, developments for wireless USB include devices that use the Wi-Fi frequencies of 2.4 up to 5 gigahertz, or the WiGig protocols, faster throughput. Next is infrared, or IR. It's found a new life in the world of IoT, where it's used primarily to collect data through various sensors. It exists just below the spectrum that's visible to the human eye, with longer wavelengths than red light. An LED is in a device creates the invisible radiation, which is then detected by the sensor's semiconductor material that converts signals into electrical current. IR sensors are used to collect information like presence of a level of liquid based on the quality of the reflection. Variations in reflections from skin based on variations of blood flow, which can be used to monitor heart rate. Proximity of the device, which can trigger an action such as steering a vehicle away from an obstacle. And commands from a control device, such as game or a TV or a remote control, something like that. Nearby light sources or dust in the air can reduce the accuracy of the collected data. IR requires a nearly unobstructed line of sight between a transmitter and a receiver. Some devices use a scatter mode that reflects IR signals off nearby surfaces in order to circumvent some obstacles, but IR cannot pass through these obstacles, so this limitation can actually be used to increase the security of IR transmissions. Next thing I want to talk about, and it's what we're a lot of us most familiar with, what most of us are going to hit out here in the workforce when we start talking about outside of Bluetooth and the IoT, is the world of Wi-Fi. Now, wireless LANs work at layers 1 and 2 of the OSI reference line, which means they're specific to the physical layer and the data link layer. Although we're able to transmit our IP addresses over this link, it doesn't make Wi-Fi a layer 3. Okay, it is more of a transport medium for us. They support the same TCP/IP higher layer OSI protocols, TCP/IP, UDP. Operating systems, Unix, Linux, and Windows, all that use wired LANs, all use wireless LANs. The most popular OSI physical and data link layers standards used by wireless LANs is something called Wi-Fi or wireless fidelity. It's a collection of wireless standards that there are amendments, extensions, and corrections developed by the 802.11 committee are always improving on. So if you've heard of 802.11a, B, G, N, A, C, they're always improving. These are the new developments of Wi-Fi. Currently, right now, the majority of us are using 802.11n and AC. They all have different speeds. When we first got into this business, the 2.4 gigahertz of wireless B, getting up a whopping 11 meg theoretical throughput, but we were only hitting probably like 3 or 4 at the time of actual throughput. But this is one of our first ones. And a lot of us network admins didn't really want to deal with it at all, just because we thought it was more of a dark magic kind of thing. It operated at the 2.4 gigahertz range. At around the same time, we had an 802.11a never really came into as wide of a use as the 802.11b. It operated at 5 gigahertz, but it was faster. It was at 54 meg per second. We used to say it was more secure at the time because people were worried about people driving by and intercepting our wireless signals. So we used to sell this one by saying, well, this was only good for 50 meters. So the average person wasn't going to be able to actually intercept our data. And that was 50 meters unobstructed. So it was actually quite a bit less than that. What then became into high popularity was a 2.4 gigahertz operating at a speed of 54 meg per second, 100-meter distances on a really good day with no obstacles. 802.11n came out, 2.4 or 5 gigahertz, up to 600 meg per second, usually hitting around 150 meg per second. About 70 meters inside, 250 meters outside. AC is when we were starting into that gigabit range, strictly 5 gigahertz. Distances would be specific on what the heck was in the way. Regardless of whatever standards you were following, all 802.11 networks share many features and innovations. The more advanced versions always came out to be backward compatible in most cases. In addition, some new innovations came out which gave some much better performance edge over the others, obviously. we talked about that the data link layer, specifically the MAC sublayer, is responsible for adding physical addresses to a data frame in the past, and for governing multiple nodes in access to a single medium. 802.3, the Ethernet standard, 802.11 appends a 48-bit hexadecimal address to a frame to identify its source and destination. It's your MAC address. The use of the same physical addressing scheme allows 802.11 networks to be easily combined with other 802 networks, including Ethernet networks. However, the 802.11 networks use a different access method than Ethernet. Ethernet uses the 802 carrier sense multiple access with collision detection, whereas Wi-Fi uses carrier sense multiple access with collision avoidance. So think of it this way. It does this to help avoid collisions, doesn't really prevent them, but it helps avoid them. So what happens is your computer, your device wants to send data out on the network. Now it is in communication with the access point or the wireless router, which we're all familiar with. Now it then says, hey, I would like to communicate in a network, and it literally makes a request to the access point. The access point then says whether or not you have clear to send. So you make a request, carrier sense multiple access, I'm listening. I'm talking to the access point. I want to make a communication, and in turn, the access point would say to you, you have a clear to send. So you get it. You make a request to send, and the access point then makes a clear to send. So before all that can happen, you actually have to communicate with the access point. You have to say to the access point, I would like to have a conversation here. I would like to be in conversation with the physical device. So for example, if your physical device's name is Bob, then you would have to look at your Wi-Fi devices and you'd be scanning, okay? You'd be scanning for a device, okay? So a computer transmits a special frame known as a probe on all available channels. Then an AP detects the probe frame and issues a probe response containing all the information the computer needs to associate with the access point, including a status code and a node ID or a station ID for that computer. The computer then can agree to associate with the AP at this point, which is the final decision of to associate with an AP, at least for the time. Usually requires consent of the user. The two nodes then begin communicating over the frequency channel. So if I want to talk to access point Bob would have the SSID would be called Bob, and then the AP would say, okay, if you want to talk to me, this is what you have to do, and then it would issue me the appropriate credentials. Okay, you have to supply this password, this passphrase, stuff like that. Okay. So a wireless-enabled computer listens on all channels in this frequency for a special signal known as a beacon frame issued periodically from the AP. The beacon frame will contain the information that a wireless node requires to associate itself with the AP. The SSID, which is a unique character string used to identify the access point. Now, there's other terminology that we need to know. One called a basic server set. Now, that's a group of nodes that share an access point. Okay, the identifier of this group of nodes is known as the BSSID, or the basic server set identifier. And then a group of access points connected to the same LAN, we have extended server sets. Now, these BSSs that belong to the same ESS share a special identifier called an ESSID. Now, with an ESS, a client can associate with any one of the many APs that use the same extended service set ID. It allows you to roam a large office space. Then when you are out of range of that one access point, you would automatically associate to the new access point without having to go through the trouble of reassociating, clicking yes, I want to associate to that particular one. No reassociation within all of that. Now, we've learned about some types of overhead that's required to manage access to the wireless network. So, for example, the acknowledgements, probes, and beacons. And for each of these functions, the 802.11 standard specifies a specific frame type by the MAC sublayer. These multiple frame types are divided into 3 groups. Management frames, which are involved in the association and the reassociation. Control frames, which are related to medium access and data delivery. Examples of this type of frame might be include an acknowledgement and the RTS, the request to send, and clear to send frames. And then data frames, which are responsible for carrying data between nodes. An 802.11 data frame is, let's see if we got a picture of that for you. As shown here, compare the 802.11 data frame with the Ethernet data frame. You can also see that the 802.11 data frame carries significant overhead, and that includes a large quantity of fields in addition to the data field itself. Now, as you can see here, we have 4 address fields. We have a source address, a transmitter address, receiver address, and a destination address. It's important because we have to know which device we're communicating with when we're talking about the APs and the cards. Next, I want to talk about would be something called MIMO. So, multiple in, multiple out. Okay. First came out with 802.11n. The multiple antennas on an access point and on a client device process the incoming or outgoing data simultaneously. That is so incredibly important because Wi-Fi in itself is what we call half duplex. Now, if you recall from previous lessons, half duplex means that I'm either sending or I am receiving. I cannot do both at the same time. Now, multi-in, multi-out, or multiple in, multiple out, gives us the ability, basically, to send and receive at the same time or simultaneously. So, your standard MIMO router would typically have 3 antennas on it. Another thing we want to discuss is the multi-user, multi-in, multi-out. Okay. Now, it's similar to MIMO. It's related to it, but it's a newer technology. It came out with 802.11 AC. It's kind of how we were able to get that gigabit speed. The feature reduces congestion and thereby contributes to even faster data transmission. Now, as with MIMO, or multiple user, multiple out, okay, MU-MIMO access can only be used at full capacity when the client devices also support it. So this is multi-user, multi-in, multi-out. Next thing we want to discuss here is something called channel bonding. We talked about how the channel width on these on Wi-Fi was 20 megahertz in size. Okay, so in 802.11n, two adjacent 20 megahertz channels can be combined or bonded together to make a 40 megahertz channel. In fact, bonding two 20 megahertz channels more than actually doubles the bandwidth. That's because a small amount of bandwidth normally reserved as buffers against interference at the top and bottom of channels can then be assigned to carry data instead. Now, because the 5 gigahertz band contains more channels and is less crowded, it's better suited to channel bonding than 2.4 gigahertz, which is another factor contributing to 802.11 AC's higher performance or improved performance. Frame aggregation here, beginning with 802.11n, is when it first started. Networks can use one of two techniques for combining multiple data frames into a larger frame. And it's called AMSDU, an aggregated MAC service data unit, or an aggregated MAC protocol data unit. Now, AC uses the MPDU for all transmissions by default. Now, both approaches combine multiple frames to reduce the overhead. Now, to understand how frame aggregation works, one, you need to understand that aggregation means to combine. Okay? So, to understand how it works, suppose 3 small data frames are combined into one larger frame. Each larger frame will have only one copy of the same addressing information that would appear in the smaller frames. Proportionally, the header fields take up less of the aggregated frame space. So in addition, replacing 4 small frames with one large frame means an access point and client have to exchange only a quarter of the number of messages to negotiate media access and error control. Now, please understand that not all techniques listed are used in every 802.11 or every 802.11 AC implementation. Also, reaching maximum throughput depends on the number and type of the strategies that are being used. It also depends on whether the network uses 2.4 or the 5 gigahertz range or band. Considering those factors in the 802.11n network's actual throughputs, they are going to vary anywhere from 65 meg up to 500 meg per second. While in 802.11ac Wave 2 networks, actual throughputs have been documented at the time when this presentation was put together. They were as high as 891 meg per client at short distances, which is pretty smoking fast. What we're going to be running through here is basically how to set up a wireless or Wi-Fi network. Okay. So now that we understand basically how the signals are exchanged, okay, and what can block them, what can hinder them, it's time for us to basically put it all together. Okay, so here we're going to talk about how to design a small wireless LAN, how to install and configure access points, and then we're going to have some actual labs, and I have lessons for those built for you as well. Basic verbiage that we need to understand, and ad hoc. Ad hoc means that we've got nodes talking to other nodes directly. So wireless device A is directly talking to wireless device B. That's ad hoc. Okay. Infrastructure, it's kind of like a star topology of a wired LAN, but think of your access point as a wireless switch. So everybody has to come to the home run back to the main AP. That's your infrastructure. Mesh networks give us the ability to have different devices all connected to each other. Several access point work as peer devices on the same network. Those are becoming super popular on home networking devices today. Okay. So there's an example of an ad hoc LAN where everybody is just talking about. You'll notice there's no access point in between on those. Today's most common networks are more like this, where we have an access point in between. So everyone talks to the access point, which is your wireless switch. Now here's an example of a wireless mesh. Now as you can see with the wireless mesh, it gives us the ability, it's not that laptops and desktops and everybody are connected to each other. It's that we have multiple access points in the building enabling us, and they all have the same name, enabling us to move from AP to AP without incident. In many of our business today, we're going to use a centralized management controller, which is going to give us the ability through one central device to be able to control all of our devices from one central point. The Cisco's, for example, access controller has a small one might have 5 ports on it, and then each port has the ability to control, I believe, like 40 trunk lines off of each one. So one controller can handle a plethora of different access points. So for an example here, you from your central management station would then have the ability to control. You can also see that access point B receives its information from access point A. It's not physically plugged in anywhere in the building. When we're setting up a home office or small office, it's important that we take into consideration coverage areas. Which is why we are building our mesh systems. You can buy the Netgear Orbi, you can buy the Google Wi-Fi, you can buy the Linksys VELOP. These are current market, right now, time of this lesson, current market mesh systems that are in use today commercially, that allow you to encompass your entire home and have strong signal everywhere. And I do believe Comcast and other companies also have wireless extenders. What's nice about having the wireless mesh system is if you have your wireless SSID set up for your house as Bob, then no matter where you go in your house, the SSID will be Bob. Whereas if you put in wireless extenders, aftermarket wireless extenders in your systems, you would have Bob on the main floor. Then you go to your second floor where you had to put your wireless extender in, it might be Bob_EXT for extender. So when we're setting things up, you want to consider the following. You want to look at the distance, what's going to be in the way, are there walls in the way, what kind of walls are in the way, what kind of interference is going to be in the way. When we look at doing buildings for commercial, we want to do what's called a site survey. Site surveys, what we want to do is we want to put a signal in one area, use something like a laptop or a cell phone or a tablet, or you can buy commercial devices that allow you to check signal strength from certain distances. When you get to a certain distance, you want to make sure that you would make a mark, then go to another area of the hallway, set up your signal, and then walk the opposite direction. You want to make sure at this point that you have your two signals overlapping each other so that your coverages never really drop off. When we do our site surveys, we use a blueprint and we mark everything off, and then we make everything just a little bit shorter because it always seems like over time your wireless access point will kind of lose signal strength over time. Maybe just wear and tear of the item because they're up 24/7. So I always try to put them a little bit closer together. You always want to make sure that you test your locations, test the farthest corners of the spaces. You want to identify any dead spots and make sure that those dead spots where there's no wireless signal is not going to be an area of your network that is of great concern. After your site survey is identified and verified the quantity and location of the access points, your job then is to go and install them. Please make sure that they all belong to the same extended service set. They all have the same SSID or extended service set ID. You want to keep them all on the same channel as well. Clients, when you're setting them up, okay, as long as the AP is broadcasting its SSID, the clients will, in vicinity, will be able to detect the SSIDs. Okay. A term called onboarding, installing a specific program or app onto a device to give it trusted access to certain portions of the network. Offboarding is removing programs that give devices permissions on the network. Okay, administrators need a feature that allows them to offboard remotely in case the AP's been lost or it's been stolen. Something that gives you the ability to remote wipe. A lot of you have seen that on smart devices like phones and tablets. By default, most of your APs today will come, like your home AP will actually come with the security on it. But your commercial ones do not, giving you the ability to set it up commercially so it meets your criteria. Your one that you have at home will automatically have one listed to it. The same, you'll have uh, your SSID and your password automatically, usually written right on the bottom. Most people like to change theirs. Some people keep theirs default. I mean, it's up to you. The only way you could learn it is if you were physically in the building and turn the device upside down. Type of security that you can use is called MAC filtering. So what would you do here within the app of the system? You'll do it in your labs. You would go in to the system. You go into security, and then you look up the MAC address of your computer. So you go to your computer. You open up a command prompt. You do an IP config/all. You find your physical address, also called the Ethernet address on some operating systems. Get that hexadecimal number and you put that into your wireless access point or your wireless router. You choose to allow or deny. A lot of people forget that piece. So if you say allow, that means that only devices that have the particular MAC addresses that you have stated are allowed to talk to the AP. If you chose deny, then those devices won't be allowed. Choose your encryption method. Choose your security method, WPA, PA2, and PA2 Enterprise. Okay, PA2 Enterprise, you would have to have a radius server and talking to an Active Directory. So you would have a list of usernames and passwords for your network to allow you to use PA2 Enterprise. Most of us in our homes are going to use WPA2, which means you just have to use your passphrase to get in. WPA is older and not in use today, and before that we used WEP, called Wired Equivalency Privacy. It's one of those things where it's better than nothing. Okay. Other security concerns that you want to understand. If you give somebody access to your wireless network, they have access to your physical network. So you'll see, for those of us who go on to CNT 125 next class, we always have you set up your own separate virtual local area network specific for guests. So the guest network can have browsing rights of the internet. They can do HTTP and HTTPS, but they can't do FTP or anything else on your network. Keeps them off. Okay. Some people use a captive portal. Think of this as when you go to your local supermarket and you sign on to their Wi-Fi, and it'll have you accept an agreement. You are now on their portal. They're monitoring what your device is doing. Okay? Security threats. Some of these are, the first two are real old school. I don't know who does them anymore. Word driving is driving around trying to find an access point that is open and broadcasting. Okay. And then to word chalk would be to physically mark the building so that other people are driving around looking for open access points would see that you've made a mark and you've labeled those people. Right? An evil twin is Let's say, for example, you are shopping at Christmas time and you stop off at, say, Panera Bread or someplace like that that has free Wi-Fi. And while you're sitting there having your wonderful bowl of soup, you decide that you want to get some online shopping done. So you figure, well, let me break out my smartphone, let me break out my laptop, whatever, and let me hop on to Panera Bread free Wi-Fi access point, which turns out not to be Panera Bread's free Wi-Fi access point. It's just some hacker who set up an access point in his book bag for you to hit so that he can capture your data and passwords and everything else. So that's called an evil twin. Okay. Okay. A WPA attack and WPS attack. A WPS is the if you hit the button on the side of your router, it allows, what happens is it's allowing you or another node, because it's in like an open access for a brief moment where you hit WPS on your computer and the homeowner hits WPS on their router. It gives you access to their device without you having to know their keys. Right? Um, some some of those devices can be hacked through brute force. A WPA involves the intercepting of the network keys between APs and the wireless stations, using packet sniffers. But either way, you have to have physical access to those devices in order to do those. If you're having problems with your network actually running and working, you want to take a look at your cables. Because remember, even though it's a wireless network, the wired part of the wireless network has to be physically connected to the wired network in order for us to be able to send our data out wirelessly. So check your cable going in first. Look for things like passwords, SSIDs, things that might be typed incorrectly. The SSID, just so we know, is not the same name as your router, and SSIDs are case sensitive. Okay? You can use spectrum analyzers or Wi-Fi analyzers. Check signal strengths to find out where you're supposed to put your devices. If those of you have, I know Apple has one, but I can't offhand think of the name of it. But I use a program called Wi-Fi Analyzer for my Android devices. It allows me to go through and set up signal strength. I use those when I do site surveys. So I'll set an AP up in one location, then I'll just walk away from it. When my signal gets weak, okay, based on a radio dial, signal gets weak on the meter, then I make a mark, and then I set my my access point on the other end of the hallway. Start walking away, and I bring the two points together until we have strong or like decent signals where the two signals should meet. So it allows me to walk from location to location. That's what I do for the site survey. Okay, gives me the ability to measure my signal strength of the access point. Okay, make sure that the association reassociation between the APs is correct. Always look for typos. Most of the problems that we have with troubleshooting are going to be human errors. And then also check the channels. Make sure that there aren't other access points in the areas that are affecting your channels. What I've noticed when I've done wireless setups for customers who live in apartment buildings is that I use my Wi-Fi analyzer and I see that the default channels that most people use when they set them up are 6 and 11. So they're hogged up and they're crowded. So I will change my wireless channel to something different for my customers. Okay. So be on the lookout for wrong SSID, security type mismatches, passphrases being typed incorrectly, interferences. Look for antenna problems. I've seen people do that already. A lot of reflection and diffraction issues within a room that has a lot of glass, plants, shiny surfaces. Period. Also, look to upgrade firmware. Okay. Look for antenna issues as well. I've seen antennas that are set up where they focus in a specific area. as opposed to being able to expand out and hook everybody up with a signal. Okay? And with that uh, ends our lesson for the day. Hopefully you got some good information out of it. You can always refer back to your book for more information. And with that, you'll have your labs to complete to hopefully reinforce what we have learned today. And that is actually it for CNT 120 for this year. I hope we all made it through okay. If you have any questions, you know where to contact me.